Those of you who have been on these calls with me before know I'm a little bit awkward with long bios. So, I'm just going to really tell you that we have Michelle Kaplan, who is the corporate poet. She's written several books of her inspirational poetry. They're really good. I would recommend them. And I'll let her tell a little bit more about herself when we get to her part. But I do want to give just a couple of minutes to my co-chair, Denise, and then Dan Meredith from the Small Business Council, just to talk a little bit about how the committee structure of the Meadowlands Chamber works and what each committee is up to. So Denise, you're first.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just really wanted to start off by talking about our next big fundraiser, which is our 501c trees. It's going to be virtual this year. So unfortunately, we're not going to have a place to actually go and see and celebrate with everyone. We're actually going to be decorating the trees at our different locations, either your office or your home, and we're going to be taking pictures and sending them in, and then it's going to be virtual. So you're going to be able to actually donate online. It's going to be an online event where everyone is coming in. Maybe we didn't really figure out the logistics yet, but we'll all be set up and you could click on the tree of your choice or the nonprofit of your choice. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out there pretty soon. It's going to start next week and it'll run through the end of December. And we'll probably put more out there in an email next week. So that's our next big fundraiser. And we'll just be talking more about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. I'm sure Joe has most of the logistics figured out already. I'm sure he's almost ready to go with that. I can't wait to use my tree as my Zoom background for a month. That's going to be pretty cool.
Oh, that's true. That's a good one. That's good.
So now we have Dan from the Small Business Council to tell us a little about how the Small Business Council works.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you very much. We're happy to be here today, and we're always willing to get together with the nonprofit committee. Small Business Council, a lot of you may know, but if you don't know, we also once a month and several times a year get together with the nonprofit committee and do our own webinars as well. Being in the Small Business Council, we represent the entire chamber in a whole, from small businesses to large, and that includes nonprofits. And that's why we're happy to always get together with the nonprofit committee whenever they've got something they want to put on. Nina Tucker is here with me today. She's the co-chair. And we have some new and exciting things coming up for you starting next year, so keep an eye out for that.
All right, Nina, did you want to add anything?
So Dan mentioned that we've got some new things coming up, but we also want to hear what you'd like the small businesses in the chamber are looking for. And we're development of a survey out to the small businesses in the chamber will be coming out soon. So we'd appreciate it if everyone, instead of just clicking delete or opening it and then closing it and not answering, we would appreciate it if you would complete that survey so we'll have a better idea of what we can bring you in 2021 to serve you better. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nina. So again, I'm going to be fielding questions in the chat function. So if during Michelle's presentation you have any questions, just type them in the chat. I will save them till the end unless I feel like it's something we all need to know right away about something Michelle said. She's happy to have us interrupt her if we have a good question. Unfortunately, Michelle's had some technical difficulties with her internet this morning, so she's joining us by phone. You're only going to be able to hear her, but that should be great. And without further ado, I'm going to let Michelle take over, tell you a little bit about herself, and tell us about some new and different ways to network in these challenging times. Thanks for coming this morning, Michelle. All yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. And first of all, I want to start off by honoring any veterans that are out there, for yourself personally or anyone in your family, as it's Veterans Day today. Thank you so much for your service. And yeah, you know, it's really interesting to me. I really want to thank you and apologize at the same time. I really believe that everything happens for a reason. And about 15 minutes ago, as I was about to log on for this call, my daughter, who is homeschooling, kind of comes up and says, you know, Mom, the internet isn't working. And I'm like, oh, no, not today, you know. And it's so fascinating to me after my initial, like, oh my gosh, you know, what am I going to do? And finding out from neighbors that, you know, through construction, the whole neighborhood is down. I mean, like, what are the chances of that? I mean, that, you know, some people believe there are no coincidences in life. And I really pause for a moment because there's always a way. And that's why I'm dialing in. And I thought about our topic today, which is creating and sustaining connections through change. And no more are we, you know, really our connections to the outside world are based on these technologies, whatever they are. And so, you know, with the phone still works, and that's fine, and we'll make it. But I'm just kind of sitting here, you know, a minute before we were going on, just kind of thinking, like, there's a reason we can still make connections. It's like listening to a podcast, which a lot of people do. So thank you on that. Yeah, a little bit about me and what we're going to be doing today is we're really going to combine, I am a leadership coach. I also do leadership development training, and I am a poet and author. And before, my lives used to be very separate. I would write and do my poetry in the morning, very early, and then work full time. And then, you know, get on with the rest of my day with my daughter and my family and things like that. And so, you know, lately I've been combining them all. I use my poetry with my one-on-one coaching. I work mostly with executives and entrepreneurs who, you know, really have some resolutions that they, you know, they need help with the problem solving. So what we're going to do today is really talk about what that, how to create and sustain, especially when with these technologies where things, you know, don't go as planned. And then we'll talk about that one key factor that's really important to create and sustain those connections. And I'll be going back and forth, but in your mind, think of somebody that you do want to make that connection with to create or sustain. So whether that's clients or with people with that you work with within your company. And then we'll talk about the different ways of how to do that. So I'm going to pack a lot in, and then the format is there's some professional skills that I'll be bringing up. And then I use poetry because poetry, you gain a lot of insights, a different perspective. And a lot of times through someone else's story, you get a better sense of your own. And so that's what we'll be doing. So let's get right into it because I do want to leave time for questions. And I do want to say this is a connections meeting. So whether you're brand new or you've been with this group for a while, I really welcome you to put in your information in the chat box. I have mine, so if you have any questions afterwards, one of the things I miss about live events is the fact that you can hang out afterwards and people ask questions. So please feel free to send me an email or connect through my website, burstandflourish.com. You know, and as well, please put your information, your name, your company, website, LinkedIn address to really start building those connections or to maintain them. So let's start off by something that you've probably heard before, which is we do business with people we know, like, and we trust. And I, for years, have been working with teams and executives about building trust with teams and within, because really that totally makes sense, right? If you don't trust somebody in any relationship in your life, if you don't trust somebody, there's no way you're really going to kind of continue having any connections with them. But I always thought there was something underneath. Like sometimes that would work and sometimes it wouldn't. Like people would say, yeah, I trust the person. But yet the connections weren't there, especially with like clients and customers and stuff like that. And I really got a sense that there's something underneath, even trust, that I really want to share with you. And what it's called the root cause for most connections is feeling safe. It's a safety issue. And the term that, that's being used a lot recently is psychological safety. So what is that? To start off, what is that? And so again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and Jeff can, kind of interrupt, and, we could just make sure you answer all your questions. But really, it's a condition where it's really like four main components from a work perspective. One, do you feel included? Do you feel like you belong? Are you part of a group? Do you connect with others where they feel like they belong with your organization, with your business? Two, do they feel safe to learn? Do they, so a lot of times I've worked with people where they're getting instruction from others, and they're kind of like, yeah, I understand. And they kind of don't, or you kind of sense that they might not understand, that they don't want to ask questions. And for some reason, they don't feel safe to ask. And that really, especially when you're dealing with your clients, a lot of times, things can be confusing or not clear. I mean, we deal with things every day. It's new to them, and they have to be okay to ask for clarification. The next is safe to contribute. Can they feel like they're safe to speak up? Which leads into the next one, safe to challenge the status quo, which really is, a diversity of thought, or do people feel okay with speaking up? So again, it's inclusion. Do they feel safe to be included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo? And so a lot of times, and this really makes sense, even like, for basic theories like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's like the foundation is a safety and a security. So it's our responsibility to make others feel safe, to feel connected, that they can speak, that there won't be any judgment or, assumptions kind of being made. And the first poem I really want to share with you was something that came up, and it's a great example about safety in the workplace, so you could kind of get a sense of what that would look like. So I was called in as a coach. I was called into a company to work with two executives who were head of two large departments. Now, they were not getting along, and they obviously didn't feel safe with each other. And in a sense, there was a lot of animosity, which then started trickling down within their teams, right? And here are two groups that need to be interdependent, that need to work together and be connected. And instead, they were like, just really excluding others, or, kind of throwing things out there. And it was really starting to impact the connections with the company's customers and with their clients. So then that's why I was called in. So here I am in this meeting with these two executives, and they both were right? They came with their data of information, why they're right, like one kind of said his piece and was kind of saying all his information on why he was right. And then the other one spoke, and it was like the complete opposite, right? The different perceptions. So after about 20 minutes of this, I was like, okay, where am I going to go with this? There was this intuitive voice in me that kept saying, read a poem that I wrote yesterday. And I was not sharing my poetry with my, kind of corporate work at that time. One, because I didn't feel safe. I'm like, would that be accepted? That's something that's kind of different. But I've learned to listen to that voice. And I asked the gentleman, is it okay if I read you a personal poem, something that I wrote yesterday? I'm not sure why I'm reading this, right? Here I am being transparent. I'm not sure exactly where we're going with this, but I just feel like I need to read it. And now they were just desperate because they didn't really want to speak about what they were talking about. So they said, yes, please, And this is a poem I read, and it's called Wordless. As soon as I picked her up from school, I knew something was wrong. My sweet, loving daughter, who usually greets me with a running hug, was quiet, forlorn, eyes downcast. She waited until we got home to bare her soul. She was left out, excluded from playing with the group. It hurts. I know. I had a similar day. Why do they do that? She whispers. I look into her big, beautiful eyes brimming with tears. I wish I could tell her the many reasons, all of which have nothing to do with her, but she wouldn't understand. I wish I could tell her something reassuring, like it will stop when she gets older, but I don't, because that's not true. Right now, in this moment, what does she need most from me? Instinctively, I slide over to her side of the couch, scoop her up in my arms and hug her tightly, tears streaming down my face now as well. We hold on to each other for dear life, for some time, taking in each other's essence. Sometimes there are just no words. So I read that poem, and it was quiet. It was quiet for about 5 minutes, which is a long time when you're kind of all looking at each other. And one spoke up and was like, wow, like right now in this moment, you know, what does he, pointing to the other person, need most from me? He's like, well, I don't consider, like, I don't even do that. Like, I don't show up like that. And it changed the whole dialogue of the conversation, where it kind of got us out of our heads and more into our intuitive place that created a different dialogue about kind of, you know, how to move forward. And that's what's really great about that tool, is that with poetry, it, or with lots of different arts, it, you know, it really does get us out of that place where we could, you know, not only have the answers, but it sometimes changes the questions. And I'm happy to report that though they're not the best of friends, I mean, they really differ on how to do things, but they really felt safe and clear about, they were both vested in where they wanted to go. The what they wanted to accomplish was the same, but they were really very, very different in how they were going to accomplish it, and realized that they could start building up the trust, realizing that, you know, one wasn't trying to threaten another in any way. And that was a big aha for me, because I really started using the poetry as a coaching tool as well. So that was really cool. So, you know, when we think about the safety, and like I said, it's our responsibility to make the people we want to connect with feel safe, and to start building that trust, because again, they have to know you, like you, and they need to trust you. So, you know, when we think about it, you know, the one key factor, I know I wrote in my description about today, you know, to create some curiosity, that you're already doing something to create that trust, to build that safety in. But it's a very broad topic. And that is called building rapport, right? We hear about that a lot. It's like, well, you have to build rapport with people to gain their trust. And that, you know, that's almost like talking about like communication skills. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can slice that. And I really want to talk about 3 or 4 key things that you can do to start building that rapport that's going to lead to the trust and creating that safety with the people you want to make connections with. And the first thing I really want to talk about is about making a positive first impression. Now, I remember years ago, there was a show, and it was called What Not to Wear. I think it was on TLC. And it was basically, the formula of the show is basically that your lovely friends or family would kind of nominate you for, like, you're either not dressed very well or how you present yourself. Either you got lazy or it's not appropriate. And so then you would be embarrassed somehow in front of others that, you know, that was the case. And then they would do a makeover with your clothes, your hair, and then there would be like a big reveal at the end and how you look differently. And most people would say, and they were correct to some point, that it's like, you know, I dress the way I want to dress. I show up the way I want to show up. And if people don't like it, then, you know, that's what's going to happen. And it's like, you know, and that is your choice to do that. But, you know, there's some really interesting statistics about how to make a first impression. Because, and one thing I want to ask, even before I go into the statistics, is I want you to use the chat box, right? Because you're just hearing my voice. Maybe you see my picture on there. And I want to ask a question. And if you could put it in there, it's that, what kind of car do you think I drive? You could either put a type of car, or you could put an actual like model or make of a car. You know, but what kind of car? And then Jeff, let me know if there's anyone putting anything like what, how people are answering about what car do I drive?
All right, well, we're getting a bunch of SUVs.
Okay.
And
awesome.
one sedan. I was going to guess Honda.
A Honda, okay. Okay.
Prius, a Volvo, a Subaru, an Audi,
okay.
fancy, a hybrid,
Nice.
Toyota Camry,
Okay.
Lexus,
Oh, okay.
wow, another hybrid. Somebody said, plot
That's
twist, you don't drive.
Wah, wah. That's awesome. Okay. A second question I want to ask is, from the little that we've interacted, it's like, do I own or do I rent my house, my home? Do I own or do I rent?
All right.
Let me know what people are saying.
Own.
I love it. Awesome.
Rent is for suckers, I think is what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. So you know, and I'll answer the question. Yes, I drive an SUV. All you SUV, I drive an Acura. So Honda was close since it's the same, I guess, parent company. And yes, I own my home, right? And what's so fascinating is that sometimes when I ask that question, people are like, I don't know, but you kind of do know, right? Because we all make these first impressions, and the little I've shared about myself and my life, right? It's just kind of known, like you know, that's how the mind works. You know, when we make judgments and assumptions, it's not all bad. There's a neutrality to it because we get bombarded with so much information that at some point we do need to compartmentalize. And it was a really good guess, right? If I'm a parent, there's a pretty good guess that I'm going to have either a sedan or an SUV. Though I do love Audi, so that would be nice. If, you know, at some point I would love to get that again. But that's just how it works. I mean, you know, some stats that I want to throw out at you, you know, for the people that like the data, is that, you know, they say, you know, through research that we make 35,000 decisions a day. And, you know, in each piece, like, right, we make a decision. It's not just the major ones. And that we have 60,000 thoughts a day. I mean, that's a lot, you know, regardless of the number, that's a lot. So in a sense, we need our brains to kind of, you know, make some, you know, quick judgments on that. And so when we think about making connections with people to create and sustain them, making a positive first impression is key. And here's some other stats for you. It takes 1/10 of a second, which I don't even know what that is. I guess unless you're a marathon runner or something, you know, you might know that because you could win a race by that. But it takes 1/10 of a second for us to make a first impression about somebody. I mean, it's like instantaneous is what it's saying. And we make about 10 judgments in the first 10 seconds of meeting somebody. In the first 30 seconds, they decide how they feel about you, right? Do they know, like, and trust you, right? And within the first 2 minutes, your credibility and perceived level of knowledge is usually established. I mean, that's pretty quick. Now, when I heard this years ago, this information, I was like, wow, okay. So my first thought is I went to, how am I showing up in the first 2 minutes or first couple of minutes with a new client or with a new connection or to sustain it? Because we really kind of think about, and for me, a lot of times with training, well, today was a perfect example where, the internet goes down 15 minutes before I'm coming on. Like, are you kidding me? And you could choose how you want to show up for something like that, but we could still make it great. It's just going to look different than how we thought, right? And that's why, flexibility is so key. So that's a question I want for you to really think about, and for yourself is, think about the first couple of minutes that you spend creating connections. And really, how are you showing up? And I'll give you some perspective from me in this new land of COVID with these virtual Zoom meetings. I do have to say that the one thing I really notice is that because a lot of times these calls are back to back, that, we're still, even though we're present in another meeting, we could still, our minds be where we were, right, in a past meeting or thinking about something else. Or we're trying to see, like, did anyone leave us a message in between? So a lot of times when I get on these Zoom calls and it's something where I'm interacting with somebody so I can actually see them, I notice a lot of people are checking their text messages, they're checking emails, and I would really encourage you not to do that, to be present and focused. And so sometimes with time management, it's not just about, we don't want to be rude and be late, right? Because that also creates not a positive first impression, but it really also kind of creates, it's going to cast some shadow or some doubt about, do we trust this person? We want people to be present and focused. So think about that, because making a positive first impression is key. So that's one way that you can create connections, is to think about that. And the one thing that I really want to share, my next poem, is a situation where I was in Trader Joe's in Wayne. And this is probably one of the last poems I wrote for my last book that just came out. And it was about kind of creating safety, and sometimes when you least expect it. So let me read it to you, because the story is within the poem, and then we could I'll kind of share some things afterwards. But this is about making a positive first impression, and the title of the poem is Messengers of Grace at the Supermarket. I heard her before I saw her, sobbing in front of the lined peanut butter jars in aisle 3. In the past, I may have walked past her awkwardly, as the other customers were doing. But today, I chose to not look away and broke the ice with a stupid joke that actually worked. Warm raindrops of laughter mixing in with the precipitation of her icy tears. Her mother had passed away, suddenly, unexpectedly, just a mere few weeks ago, and she habitually was about to grab her mom's favorite off the shelf when the reality of her new normal stung her into omission. We stood there for a few minutes, talking about peanut butter, moms, and grief, and how we brace ourselves for anniversaries and birthdays. But the simple, innocuous intricacies that intertwine to become the fabric of our lives can also have grief barreling through life's store. I let her decide when the conversation was over, and I wished her well as she moved her shopping cart to safer ground, and me into new territory, happy I answered the call of the wild. So you can see, when you create safety and you're creating connections and it's your responsibility, one thing I really kind of always mention, like when you go to these different events or these different phone calls and things like that is I always kind of say to tell people, pretend that you're like the host of the event, even if you're not, like you don't want to take over completely because that would be kind of weird. But you do want to kind of just, go out there and make those introductions to others and like really having like meaningful introductions, meaning it's like, hey, not Michelle, here's John. It's kind of like, the little you know about somebody, it's like, oh, hi, this is Michelle. I heard her speak at this event on November 11th. She does work with leaders, right? If that's all you remember. And then, it gives somebody something to talk about, right? It's like that kind of catch to start creating those connections with people. So I always say, be a giver and start like, kind of like, it's actually a lot of fun, but the more that you give of yourself, you're making these great connections with others that, they may or may not reciprocate, and that's really okay. It's kind of like to kind of, they might think of you when they're also, wanting to introduce you to other people, because that's really what networking is about. You want to hang out with the people who are going to really recommend you and introduce you to others that you can be of service to on that. So, and in the poem, I think what's really important with that is that, I let her decide when the conversation was over. She's the one that wasn't feeling safe in the supermarket. And safety is a very subjective term. It's kind of like, we always think, well, because a lot of times we don't purposely or intentionally create, distrust and want to make people feel like uncomfortable in any way. But a lot of times we're coming from our perspective. And so that's why having a broader view and different perspectives can really, help you in ensuring that you're creating safety. So like one example I had was like years ago, I was traveling for work, and it was a bunch of us all took a flight, and we landed, we got to the hotel, and they had, for some reason, they assigned me a hotel room on the bottom floor. And everybody else I was traveling with had rooms on the second or third floor of this hotel. And I immediately, heard the room number, which was like 110 or whatever it is. I'm like, wait, is that the first floor? And I was like, because I really don't feel safe traveling by myself as a female and being on the first floor. And I was traveling with a gentleman who was having some physical limitations at the time and was in a wheelchair. And he had the complete opposite reaction. He wanted the first floor. He felt unsafe that the fact if he was on the second or third floor, and God forbid we had to leave and it was an emergency, that he wouldn't be able to take an elevator. So we were very happily able to switch, but you could see how unintentionally, just coming from different, different life experiences and beliefs, what kind of creates that, safe environment to create and sustain that relationship. Okay, so we have making a positive first impression, and we're going to now talk about the inner state. I love studying success. I mean, why I love working with leaders so much is that I love studying what makes leaders successful. I read a lot of biographies and things like that. And most athletes, most leaders have some type of whether it's a ritual, there's some process before it's either game day, before the Olympics, before they're going into that big meeting, where they have something where they kind of calm their, like what I call like the inner state, whether it's a visualization, whether it's some type of affirmation, whether it's like they go work out. But most leaders, I can't even think of anyone that I've recently, they don't have something where even for a moment, they kind of get to a different place in their head before they start creating those connections with others. So it's like what I kind of call, do you want to be like the bull in the china shop when you kind of come in? Remember, especially with those first impressions. Or do you want to be more like a swan, right? And a swan, what I find so fascinating is that, under the water, their feet are, kind of pedaling, kind of moving so fast and constant. But above the water, they just kind of glide, right? They're kind of calm, cool, collected. and, you know, to really kind of tap into that. And one of my favorite stories is with President Kennedy when he was first elected. Someone had shared this with me because, you know, I ask leaders all the time, what is it? You know, the first people are like, what are you talking about? Some type of mantra. But then they kind of get it. Like, what's your process for kind of getting into like the zone, I kind of call it. And one was telling me how he really copied President Kennedy when he was just elected. He was going out for one of his first, you know, kind of like press meetings with the press. And he really didn't know much, right? Here he's just elected, and he knows they're going to ask a lot of questions that he doesn't have the answer for. And so he's really concerned about that. So he's hanging out with the press secretary beforehand and, you know, sharing his concern. And the press secretary told him, just here, you know, shared these 4 statements that really grounded President Kennedy. And he went out there and, you know, however he showed up, but, you know, how you show up is much differently. And he heard, these are the 4 questions, if you're curious. The press secretary said to him, just think to yourself, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad you're here, right, to the press. I know what I know, right? I know what I know. That's like a confident statement. And I care about you. Just hearing that. And then he went out there and kind of, again, it's like you can be patient. You can kind of say, like, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And it really kind of creates, you know, and it really impacts how you show up in the world. One of the poem I get most requested to read is a short poem. And it is, you know, something where it's like, I am the goal-oriented person, right? So it's kind of like, I need to kind of have some type of metric for myself. And the poem that most people like and request to read is called, If I Was Lovable, right? Because what is lovable? If I was worthy, if I was enough. And I kind of don't necessarily start each call or interaction when I make connections throughout the day, but I definitely start my day with this, because I'm trying to take something intangible and make it tangible. And this is a poem. It's called, If I Was Lovable, What Would I Wear? What would I eat? What music would I listen to? Where would I go? Who would I hang out with? How would I show up? What would get my attention? What would I act on? And what would I ignore? And would it look like today? So it's really putting me in a very mindful place. And then me, of course, you know, at the end of each day, I kind of just do a quick inventory of, you know, how was my day? How did it go? You know, was I showing up, being fully present and focused on, you know, what, you know, where I'm at, and how am I, you know, making those impressions and showing up for others. So that is the inner state. Other things that you can do to create and sustain your connections is to have some type of plan, because you could always change a plan, but a plan gets you into action. And one thing that's really popular, I just find this fascinating with somebody that, you know, I just talked to. She's a financial planner. And she, when she does networking events or meets with clients, is that she has a goal. Like, you know, if she's going to create connections, it can be very overwhelming when you go into large groups and there's like, you know, 100 people there. But she has a goal of meeting about 3 people. She wants to connect with 3 new people and reconnect with at least 2 people. So whether there's 10 people there or there's 100 people there, it's very manageable, right? You've just chunked it down into something very manageable to start really making real, authentic connections. You know, so that's really important to do, you know, as you're building up like your credibility and your rapport. And the last thing I want to mention is what something is called pre-framing. And pre-framing you probably already might do at times, but it really is important to create that sense of safety, to build the trust, to create and sustain relationships. And what pre-framing is really when you kind of, just explain what you're doing, right? In the beginning of today, right, we kind of explain it's okay to ask questions if you want, please reach out to me if you have any questions. This is what we're doing. This is a topic we're talking about. And it seems kind of obvious. People are like, yeah. But it's really important that you do it because people like a beginning, they like a middle, and they like an end, right? I mean, think about shows when they leave you with those cliffhangers or to be continued. Like, we want to know how things kind of end. And it creates a lot of confusion when you have meetings with clients and with people, and that you have a great conversation, but you don't leave with kind of like either like, okay, I'll take care of this and you take care of that. There's some kind of conclusion, or we'll have a follow back call, like we schedule a call for next week so we could circle back on something. You do your part. So people like some type of ending, just as it's important to make a positive first impression and to plan on how you're showing up, but you also want to have some type of ending as well. So as we wrap up here, because it was a lot covered here, and I want to see if there's any questions or comments, I want you to think about what we spoke about, because when you pre-frame, what's really important is that people want to know, like you're telling people what to expect, but people also want to know what you expect of them. And that's one, as a leader, one of the questions I ask my team a lot, or with my clients, is kind of like, I'm explaining what I do and those types of things, but what do you expect from me? And what do I expect from you? Like, how can we make this work? And I'm telling you, sometimes I work with people for a long time, and when I ask that question, I always glean something new from it. It's like fascinating to me. And it kind of keeps that open conversation, going. So you're continuing to kind of build that trust. So the last poem I'm going to end with, and if you could think about what are three key takeaways that you've heard in this time that we've had together, and what's one thing that you would do differently? And if you could share at least one of those things in the chat box, and there's really two main reasons. This is a networking event as well as professional development. And so in a sense, one, you want to share because it might give an idea to somebody else. And then two, is that somebody might, have a similar type of, answer and be like, wow, like I might want to know this person better. So again, please put your contact information in the chat box so someone can reach out to you afterwards. This is virtual, so we have to make it work. It's not like we can kind of mill around afterwards. So as you're thinking about your three key takeaways and one thing you're going to do different, I'm going to end with something that it's one of the poems that I wrote right around the time with all the school shootings that were going on. I mean, talk about a time feeling unsafe. So I'm going to say that's about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, when those school shootings were happening, and I wasn't feeling safe. And when we think of ourselves as leaders, and from a professional development standpoint, the conversation will usually get to legacy. Kind of, the work we do is important and purposeful, and like, what are we leaving behind? What is it that we want people to remember us by? And most of the time, that's why I love talking about this topic, is people remember the connections. They remember how somebody helped you. You could think about those great people in your life who helped you, through their connections and contacts and things like that, and just even connecting with you. And so in a sense, that is, really what is part of this last poem. that I wrote because a lot of times I write to get clear on things. And I know that, they might still do it now, but the 10 o'clock news, I think it's Fox News now, but it was I just called it Channel 5 growing up. They used to ask right before the news, do you know where your children are? Right? And that's the title of this poem. And this is what I wrote. We tell our kids how we kept the doors unlocked and played outside without a grown-up around, and rode our bikes all over town for like forever until the glow from the streetlights or our moms yelling our names told us to come home. And how we walked right into amusement parks and concerts with just our tickets and spending money without metal detectors and bag checkers. And how our phone calls were also monitored as we pulled the cord from the kitchen phone as far away from any eavesdroppers in the den. And how our questionable behavior was recorded by our neighbors with the threat of telling our parents. And the biggest scare and annoyance was having to wait to eat our Halloween candy until our parents checked for razor blades. Oh, and that we wore flammable pajamas to bed. And war was a thing that you read about in history books and saw happening in distant lands, far, far away on the 6 o'clock news. And though our childhood wasn't idyllic or quintessential by any means, we tell our kids how we kept the doors unlocked. I wonder what our kids will tell theirs. Thank you. So Jeff, are there any questions or any takeaways or something?
I actually had a question. I love that last poem, by the way. That was great. Very powerful. And
thank you.
I identified with a lot of that stuff there, so I guess I'm showing my age a little bit. But
yes.
I had a question back to the supermarket poem about, letting the conversation end. That's one of the things I find most difficult at a networking event is how do you get out of a conversation? Not because necessarily you are not pleased with how it's going or not impressed with the person you're talking to, but just because you want to work the room. Like, do you have any suggestions? Does anyone have any suggestions about how to politely move on to the next connection?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it can be quite, awkward moments. Really, I think that it really goes back to having the plan. Like, so for instance, when I go to networking events, I usually have a specific, like the person I shared with the client, I usually have a sense of that, I usually want to meet, and connect with as many people as possible. And sometimes I even go to networking events because I have like a need. Like when I needed a website developer, I was going to an event and I was asking people, okay, who does website development here? Like, you need to introduce me because I'm looking for somebody. So I have very specific things. So, in a sense, it's like that's where it comes in handy because after speaking for some time, so just say, a lot of those events are an hour, hour and a half. What I do is literally will, kind of say like, if I'm connecting with you, right, because we're in sync and I'm like, well, I want to know more about this person. The first thing I'll do is like, I'll say, like, hey, I really, enjoyed speaking to you. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn so I can read more about like your background and information. And is it possible? And I actually like pull out my phone and I'll say like, could we schedule something like just a half-hour call? Because I would love to hear more, but I do, want to, meet as many people as possible. And most people kind of understand that and get it, so then in a sense, and then you're just scheduling it right there on your phone. Now, if it's somebody that you don't want to follow up with, that's okay too. I would just kind of say like, hey, thank you so much. I mean, I still connect. I'll always kind of say, can I connect with you on LinkedIn so I can get some more information and have your information for the future? And then just say like, thank you so much, because, you're really acknowledging that this, this is a networking event. And even if it's not a formal one, I'll do that. You know, it's much better than kind of saying like, oh, I need to get something to drink. I hear people do that, and then they go off and get water, and then they don't even get that far, and they're talking to the next person. It's okay to, you know, especially if you're not like connecting with somebody, you know, literally, or, you know, being in sync with somebody. But that's what I usually do is like, you know, it's great to build your LinkedIn network. And so again, I encourage you, you know, I'm Michelle J. Kaplan on LinkedIn. There's a lot of Michelle Kaplan. So Michelle J. Kaplan, you know, like just connect with me, you know, and those types of things. And then it feels more natural. Does that help?
No, that's definitely great advice. I mean, yeah, setting up a future appointment, and you know, it definitely validates them as well. You know, and lets them know that you were interested. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, and then really with the world of virtual now, you know, and you know, the like I said, a lot of times what comes up that impacts creating connections is really a time management issue. I really encourage people, even if you could leave a 5-minute buffer in between calls. I mean, I know, you know, we wouldn't necessarily do it, you know, when we were in person or something, but to really, you know, to really think about how you're showing up in the beginning. You know, you don't want to be late, and you want to be focused and present on where you're at. I mean, that's why I've been training for years, and that's why trainers do icebreakers. It's not, you know, it's nice to bring the group and have them connect, but it's also a lot of times you could see people are still back at their desks, and now they're in this, you know, other room for training, and you have to start kind of bringing people present and focused. And so a quick 15-minute icebreaker usually, you know, kind of grounds them to where they're at. So even if you could leave a 5-minute buffer. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we have another question that's somewhat related to that. So, you know, if you do end up making a bad first impression, what are some suggestions for overcoming that and correcting it?
I know. We've all done it. We're all guilty. Yes. So that, you know, it actually, I don't have the exact statistic on the amount, but it does take much longer to build that. So really that comes down to the consistency. And that's why, like, from a leadership style, the more that you can, you know, when you make a poor first impression, the first thing is to give an honest and authentic apology. So a lot of times, so for instance, it's not even like something like dramatic happened, but a lot of times if I can kind of get a sense, if I hang up a call or I get off a Zoom call, or when we used to meet in person, you know, I kind of got a sense that something was off, I will call that person back and just be like, hey, just wanted to follow up, and, you know, because, you know, part of it is my responsibility, like I said, to kind of own that. And then, you know, usually it's a matter of managing the expectations of what was kind of set. So, you know, whether it's a formal, you know, kind of apology, or if it's to follow back up and to just kind of, I call it kind of clear the air. And then it's really, if you have to keep connecting with this person, you know, it's really the consistency of who's showing up. And then they could realize that that was a real one-off. That isn't who you really are. And that, you know, that could just take a few times on that. Because even when you make a first, you know, like a great first impression, you know, it's not like, okay, I'm one and done. It's kind of like you have to just, as I'm saying, if I knew you for a while, and, you know, we give people the benefit of the doubt on that. But, you know, and it happens once in a while where things are, but you still have to kind of keep showing up for people, right? I mean, that's why with any relationship we have in our life, it, you know, sometimes like there is work involved with kind of keeping it front and center and giving people the attention. And the other thing to make, you know, with that is that, you know, especially if you did not make a great first impression in the world of Zoom and virtual meetings, I would definitely put the camera on. I know a lot of times people show up with the cameras off. Not for this type of event, but I mean, like when there's an interaction, like if you're having a meeting, and I would really, I always set the stage and let people know, you know, the camera will be on. I ask that you be ready to have that camera on. And again, that's the pre-framing part, you know, make it safe. Like I'm setting the expectations. I really want you to be present and focused, you know, that type of thing.
So, Michelle, we have time for one more question. There's one more here in the chat, but I just want to remind everyone, while, you know, Michelle's finishing up this last question, go ahead and try to network as best you can in the chat. Let us know who you are, who was here today. And people can go through it before we sign off and see who everyone else was. Maybe there's the off chance that somebody was looking for exactly what service you provide. So let us know who you are. And I'm going to let Michelle respond to this last question. The person says the judgments and assumptions are challenging. You talked about this earlier, Michelle, about people making assumptions and judgments based on very little information. So what is your best advice for helping a person feel comfortable in talking with you and getting beyond those judgments and assumptions?
Wow, that's like a whole day class. It's a great question. I'm laughing because it's like, whoever asked that really got to the heart, got to the core issue, right? That's why it's so great. And that's what I do a lot with my coaching clients, right? It's kind of like, how do we kind of get past that? But the short answer on that, I think, how do you kind of get past that is that, I think a lot of times people, with the judgments and assumptions that people make, if you can kind of pick up, that's why it's so great to be present and focused, because people come up with their own interpretations of stuff. It's really interesting to me how it's like, like when people show up and I was on somebody on a Zoom call where I'm watching this person speak and everybody else is on their phones, and I'm guilty of it, right? I'm making the assumption like, wow, like no one's giving this person, like everyone's so busy, right? There was some empathy to it, but there was some judgment, and I always say, call it out instead of kind of like deferring it or give them but to do it in a way, right? Because back to JFK's his mantra, I care about you. Right? It's kind of more like, oh wait, let's just take a time out. You kind of call it in a way. It's like, is everyone super busy? Like, does everybody just need like a 5-minute break because everyone is kind of focused on their phones. So either people will kind of get off or not. Some of those other assumptions and judgments about who we are and things like that, I think through time, when people get to know you, that some of that will be kind of dispelled and things like that. But unfortunately, that is the way, and a lot of it is just if you could keep the bigger perspective and then kind of show others how you are kind of showing up. It's really through the actions that you can really negate negative impression that somebody kind of formed of you that isn't true. Like I'm even thinking of those 2 executives that I was talking to about earlier, where they made a lot of assumptions based on their actions that weren't true. And it just took a real heart-to-heart conversation to kind of get past that.
Well, thanks for that answer. You're right. There probably could be an all-day workshop on assumptions and challenges of overcoming them. But we really do thank you for coming this morning, Michelle. This was great. The poetry is great. It's definitely a different approach. I bought the book when I met Michelle a couple weeks ago, and I've been reading a couple every day, and there's some good stuff in there. So go ahead and check out her website and find out how you can do that. And thank you so much. If anybody has feedback and needs to reach Michelle, her information is in the chat. Scroll up. I can put it in again as well. If anybody has suggestions for presentations you'd like to see in the future, let us know that as well. You can reach out to me. I just put my email address there. Michelle, do you have any final thoughts to get us started on our Wednesday?
No, I think I just want to thank you all very much for your time. And, make connections with me. I have no problem, being, of service and helping you out. If you have something specific that you just want to talk out, I put that onus back on you to kind of say, I'm making myself available. So, don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Michelle. Everyone have a great Wednesday. Thank a veteran today at some point. Get some work done, make those connections, and we'll see you for 501c trees. Look for that email and look for that survey from the Small Business Council. Feedback is really important for what you guys want to get out of the chamber. You get out what you put in. All right. Have a great Wednesday, everybody.